So we do have a guest with us tonight. Paul from Granville Chapel is here.
Thank you, Benny.
So Jeff goes to Granville Chapel, and so
This is Jeff's chair.
He heard I was coming and didn't come.
so Paul's interested in just how they can be supportive of React and possibly in getting it in Vancouver. So Mike will be working with them, and there's supposed to be a lady from Vancouver coming as well. So lots of connections happening. We have a group here from Edmonton as well that somehow they ran into us and they knew me. So. Okay, so back to boundaries. So you got a whole bunch of handouts just so that you know what they are. The emotions wheel, that's Thursday. We're probably not going to get to that tonight. The other ones we will get to tonight. So you can just put them up in your boundaries part. What I thought to start is something that I have found helpful for people in early recovery when it comes to thinking about the importance of boundaries. So I do a plus person. So a plus person is somebody that when you spend time with them, you walk away feeling, I'm glad I spent time with them. They charged my batteries, they filled me up, that was a positive experience, okay? A negative person is somebody you spend time with and you go away and you go, I'm exhausted, that just sucked all the life out of me, they are so demanding, so needy, so draining, etc., okay? So the reality in recovery is that they will have very few relationships where they're feeling positive and they have another positive friend that mutually build each other up. That's very rare. So usually it's going to be they're in a negative place and they find a mentor that helps them, or they're in a positive place and somebody wants to get help. And so in recovery you have lots of people who are in need, and if you're in a good place you don't mind helping them. But what I want people to understand is if you have too many friendships, so the one I'm really talking about goes like this. If you have too many friendships where you have too many negatives in your life, they will soon turn you into a negative. They do take a toll on you. And if when you're in a negative, if you don't have a positive person in your life, and you just find other negative people, you're going to go downhill fast. And so the challenge in early recovery is I need to carefully guard the amount of negative people in my life. And that's really hard because you want friends, you're feeling lonely, you want to help, you want to serve, and you can fill your calendar up in no time with lots of needy, negative people. And before long, you're right there with them, just as negative because you're totally drained. So that just, again, gives them a way to help them think through the importance of boundaries when it comes to relationships with other people, both in recovery and out of it. And I believe this is Mary. Okay, so last night, we ended with how do we set boundaries? Let's get practical. So let me just kind of take you through a couple things that I want you to be aware of when you are in as a counselor or somebody helping addicts. There's a bunch of things for your boundaries, both professionally and because of your position. that are really, really important that you need to be aware of. So number one, and those of you that have been involved in lots of this type of ministry, you can validate what I say or share experiences, but you will get clients or people you work with who want to be in your life, but they have a hidden agenda. And so they basically want to use you, but they're really wanting to act like they're your friend and they want help and all of that, but it's really a game, it's a hustle for them, and they want to use you. So it's important for working that you keep a lot of people for quite a while at arm's length, just till you get to know their true colors. And then you'll get some that want to position themselves close to you for their own ego. Hey, I'm Tim's right-hand man, or he asked me to do this, or he hangs out with me and he gave me a job, and all of that is all about themselves. And so you will get that kind of, they want to position you, but they act like they really like you, they respect you, they want to be your friend and close to you. And so those are just some of the things. And the problem is if you don't catch that and you let them get close, they are a pain to get rid of. And it is really, really difficult, and it can really take a toll on you if you got to manage too much of that. The next one, you will get clients who are terrible at boundaries, and you develop a sense very quickly of clients that have poor boundaries. So I'll give you a couple examples. I have clients in counseling, and so it comes to the end of the counseling session, and they don't want to leave. They got one more thing they want to ask you about. And so eventually you just got to say, hey, it's time to go, but they're standing at the door still trying to get you to solve their next crisis. Or if they're in a crisis, they will phone you at home, they will text you, or they will just show up and really expect that you take them in right at that moment because they're in crisis. One of the things that I've learned is to give in to those type of people only feeds it. It doesn't satisfy it and make it go away. It feeds it so they just keep doing it more and more. And so when I sense a person that doesn't have good boundaries, I just know right up front I have to be very firm. And they might think I'm a bit rude, but that's just what I know I have to do in order to establish clearly up front, this is the boundary, and you're not going to be able to get past that. And that's really, really important for a lot of clients to be able to get that clear message early on. Because as long as they think they can manipulate you, they're not totally focused on the program. They're working on their game. So you want them to be able to totally focus on themselves, and they need clear boundaries. One of the things that was of interest to me, and I don't know if you've heard it, but back in the 60s, I believe it was, there was all of this coming out of the harsh punishment, spanking era, and we were too hard on kids and abuse and all of that. And so some parent teachers said we need schoolyards that don't have fences. That makes our kids feel like they're in prison. And so they took all the fences down. You know what the kids did? They huddled in the center of the field. So they still needed a boundary to feel safe.
Wait, well, where was that? They did that to us. We left. We went to the store.
Maybe you're the special case on that. I don't know.
No, it was
Okay.
very common in my junior high school.
I think this was an elementary younger kid, if I remember. But the point is that even like we're dealing with adult bodies, but immature children inside, and so they definitely need that secure sense of a boundary. And what you'll find with clients is they'll accept the boundary, feel secure in that, but then because their own life has been so chaotic, every couple of weeks they got to just test it. Is it still there? And that can be really annoying because they're testing the rules again, and you go, come on, get it through your head. But they have so much inconsistent boundaries in their history, they need to make sure it hasn't changed. And so that's just so you're aware of that.
I really love that. I remember when I first started at, if I may.
Yep.
I remember when I first started at night shift, one of the things that I really appreciated years ago at night shift was the initial training and how we had certain boundaries and not really being used to being on the street and being terrified the first day I was out there. I was like freaked out, but it was really important to have that real good wisdom. You know, they're going to ask you for a quarter, they're going to ask you for a hug, they're going to ask you for this, and they're going to ask you and ask you. And so over the years, that's been my experience, and I'm really hard and fast, so they know, right? They know that now they know. And so I was in the art class one day, and then somebody came to ask me something, and then some other people in the art class were the ones that said, "Oh no, it doesn't work." It's like, they're kind of like self-regulating, but it's good.
And that's the beauty of what begins to happen is
Yeah.
the older clients coach the younger clients
Yeah.
and say, hey, no, don't try that.
Yeah, they don't hate you for the boundary.
Exactly.
The boundary is, there's some comfort in it, but
Exactly. As long as they know it's fair
yeah,
and it's for their best
and
interest.
consistent, yeah.
So one other thing just for you to be aware of, and this is just helpful for myself to remind myself of, people that come up into us, they don't have any sense of what a healthy relationship looks like. And so a healthy relationship is all about healthy boundaries. And so what I have to realize is I have to be the one that shows them what healthy boundaries are and what healthy relationships are, because they have no sense of that. So I have to take some initiative and saying, this is the way it's going to be, this is the way it's going to be, this is allowable, this isn't. And that is so important, because otherwise, if they don't have that, you giving that, then they're just going to start testing and they're going to try stuff. And if they get away with it, then they think it's okay. And then you got that to deal with. And so just be aware of that kind of thing. But that puts really the parenting role back on us, that we are showing them what healthy relationships look like. Okay, any questions on that part? Okay, so let's go now to this setting boundaries. What I'm hoping you are seeing is, when I first teach boundaries to clients, what they hear is black and white. Say no, say yes, clear, simple. And then they start thinking, but what about this? And it gets grayer and grayer and grayer. And they begin to realize each relationship has its own unique boundaries. There are boundaries that are common for every relationship, but there's unique ones for each relationship. And often you're not sure exactly what you should do in some of those relationships. And so when I see clients get beyond just the black and white boundary setting to what about this, what about that? So in their mind, if you set a firm boundary, that basically you kick everybody out of your life. And it's, no, you don't need to go there. You need to figure a way that you can still have a relationship, just a different one. And that then takes them into gray. And they don't like that. And so they'll come and they'll want you to either tell them exactly what to do or to set the boundary for them. And when I refuse to go and set the boundary for them, they don't like that. And when I don't just tell them what to do, but make them wrestle with it, that is really good for their growth. I'll get clients that come and say, I can't stand that other person. Would you go talk to them so they don't keep asking me for stuff? And I go, no, you go and ask. So what I say to clients is, 50% of what you're going to learn is me teaching. The other 50% you're learning by living it. With people where you have to set boundaries, you have to stand up for yourself, you have to do stuff. And that is the scariest part of the learning process. But if we take that away from them, then we're actually doing them a disservice. The other thing is people in crisis, so borderline personality people that got triggered. In their mind, this is an emergency that has to get solved now. And one of the things that I've learned when I first started, the lady that trained me, she says, don't stay late after work to help them. Say you'll talk to them in the morning. And she said they'll be mad at you and they will just can't think you're so unloving and uncaring She says you come back in the morning and one of two things will happen. Either it'll solve itself, or they'll realize it didn't kill them. And they'll have grown because of that. So don't just run when there's a crisis. Sometimes make them wait. And that is actually forcing them to grow and to learn. So to say that another way, when children are really little, you tell them what to think. You think for them, basically, and they begin to learn. But when they're 20, you don't still want to do their thinking for them. So what a parent's job is to initially tell them what to think, but gradually show them how to think. And if they learn how to think, then they can begin to solve their own problems. So part of what happens in complex trauma is they're not trained how to think. And so they were either told what to think by dad, or they weren't told anything and their brain spins every night, all night long, trying to figure out a solution, but they don't know how to reach a solution because they haven't been taught how to weigh out pros and cons and look at it from different angles. So part of what we do is not just tell them what to think early on, but begin to show them how to think and then force them to think. And they don't like that, but that becomes a huge growing thing. And when they actually start to think for themselves and weigh stuff out, and they have a positive outcome, they get so excited about that. It's like a little kid that, wow, I just did this and it worked. And they can't wait to tell you about it. Okay, so what we talked about yesterday in learning to set a boundaries, as I told you to write down the 5 closest people. And so the first thing you do is what boundaries need to change to make this a healthier relationship. And so we do that with people. So one of the things that you can do, and it turns into a relationship exercise, but it's just called relationship mapping, and it goes by different names. So basically, this is you in the center, and then you build your galaxy around. And so you have those closest to you, those further out. But a lot of people will realize they don't have any close planets to them. Everybody's way out there, or they might only have one person close to them and nobody else. So it's just another tool for them to see kind of the state of their existing relationships. And then you get them to evaluate, scale of 1 to 10, how healthy is that relationship? And if it's a 4, what would need to change to make it better? What you can expect at this point is a lot of people will really focus on their relationship with their kids, because those are probably the closest, and they're the ones that they're struggling with because their kids are starting to act out, etc. And so that can lead to a lot of really important thinking about what do I do with boundaries around my relationship with my children. Okay, then the second thing we do prepare for possible circumstances. So I ask clients, if you were walking down to the mall in Winnipeg today and you saw your drug dealer, do you know what you would say? Do you know how you would respond? And sadly for a lot of people, they haven't even thought about that. And so part of boundary setting is anticipating, what if this happened? How would I respond? And so they will begin to give different examples, and sometimes we actually do role playing. So you have, you go to your mom's and your parents' house, and then somebody brings out the weed and the beer, and you're getting triggered. What do you do? And so we do that so they actually act it out. So the more scenarios that you can throw out there that they might run into is very important. So we'll get clients that will go to a Finding Freedom, and they work the streets and they'll see a John. What do? They just freak out usually, but they need to kind of be prepared because that triggers them big time. And then we'll actually get clients who all of a sudden, out of the blue, get a text from their ex, want to go hang out, or want to get laid, whatever, and how are you going to respond to that? Or they get a text from somebody they're in recovery with who's relapsed and wants to know if they want to use with them. And so it's preparing, what are you going to do, because this stuff will happen. And so the more you have kind of rehearsed in your mind the boundaries ahead of time, the easier it will be to implement them when the situation happens. Because if you wait till the situation happens and you're triggered, you're in fight flight, and your cerebral cortex is shut down, so you're not able to think of all of that stuff very quickly unless you prepared and planned for it ahead of time.
You're teaching that class, and you're doing the activity prepare for possible circumstances. Do you elicit from the crowd the possible ideas, or do you have a paper with all sorts of scenarios on it?
Both. Yeah. So we want to make sure we cover some of the key ones, but then that gets the wheels turning, and then they start, because everybody's going to have their own unique things. Like we had one lady, well, I asked them, what are you going to do if your kid who's a teenager comes home higher than a kite? How are you going to respond? And like that, normally they'd freak out, they'd go to their old anger and shaming and all of that, and then they'd regret it later. And so, like, don't wait till then and do something that you're going to regret and do a lot of damage. Prepare for that kind of thing. So what are you going to do if your kid comes home and says, Mom, I'm pregnant? How are you going to handle that? Or your kid says, Mom, I've been cutting. And so, like, I think one of the worst things that parents do, Christians included, my kid's cutting, that's the problem, let's fix them. And I go, that's the symptom of the problem, let's find out what's really going on here. But if the kid just feels you want to fix them, then they don't feel loved, they just feel, I'm a trophy for you to show off. And if I'm not good, then it makes you look bad and it's all about you. And then that hurts them even more. So, but that's their go-to, is as soon as a kid says, I'm cutting, okay, off to a psychiatrist, we're going to get you fixed. And that's would be the disastrous response. So I don't want them to just prepare for like possible drug type of situation, so I want them prepared for that, but I want them to think bigger than that. Family situation, children growing up situations, all kinds of things.
That's good advice.
And you'll find that a lot of them have encountered some of those circumstances, and they'll give each other great feedback. Here's what I tried. Here's what I did. Here's what helped me. And it's amazing. They just start helping each other when that's happening. Another big one that it's important to get them to think about is what happens if you wake up tomorrow and your depression hits you out of the blue. You have a plan in place, or your anxiety is at a panic attack level. What's your plan? Or if you had a using green, what's your plan? Because they will have using greens.
What is that?
A using green? That's when you're actually smoking up, you're actually shooting up, you're dreaming about using. So those typically change, and Ron or Jeanette can refer to this, but often in the early days they're using dreams, they actually in their dreams are using, and they wake up feeling like they have used, and they just feel guilt and shame, and it's a crisis point. As they grow, they will have dreams that change to, they'll see the drug, they'll be attracted to it, but they won't use it. And then they'll even go beyond that to times where they'll see it and just have no interest in it. And there's a progression that begins to happen. And so a lot of them, when they first have a using dream, they just beat themselves up because they think they failed, they think this means I'm not doing something right. And so it's really important to validate this is normal. your brain is trying to sort out lots of years of stuff. And so this is part of the sorting out process.
True. Oh, yeah. Lost my sobriety several times this year.
Yeah, in your drink.
In my drink.
Yeah. But they do have a huge emotional impact.
Yeah, especially in the beginning.
Exactly.
When you set you off for a couple of days.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that begins, so one of the things is what happens if you get a craving, okay? So usually they'll say, call my sponsor, or call somebody, and if they're honest with themselves, once they let a craving go on for a bit, they're not gonna call a sponsor. It's gone too far. So they realize that if I don't get it right away, I'm gonna be in trouble. And so that's part of what you want them to realize, is there's a timing element in when you react to certain situations that's just as important as how you act.
You can map your dreams too. You can
Yep.
map them,
Yep.
right? So,
Yeah, and some people write them down just to keep track and see the progression, etc. Yeah. So as you can see, that becomes an important tool because a lot of people, when they're in recovery, they're just kind of focused on what they're doing in recovery, and they're not really thinking ahead a whole lot. The only thinking ahead is, am I going to get a job or am I going to live? That's kind of the focus, but not about a lot of life circumstances that might come up. So I'm always cautious around the role playing. Britt, did you do role playing a couple times with this? Yeah. What you'll get is the clients that are extroverts and are great actors and love to ham it up. They just love role playing. The introverts all cower in the corner and hope nobody picks them to play a part. So you have to be a little bit sensitive to your client mix. But it can be very rewarding and fun for them to do the role playing because they actually can picture their mom in the living room, etc. Okay? So the next thing that I want you to think about here is, so we talked about the levels of friendship. So you go from an acquaintance to a casual friend to a close friend to a soulmate. And there's boundaries at each level. So what I want them to think about is, what criteria do I use to determine that a person is safe enough to go to a closer friendship? So I asked this, and I'm not making this up, but I ask guys and girls when they're thinking about dating, okay, what's your criteria for dating? Guess what their criteria is? Is she hot? Do we have things in common? And are they good in bed? That's their criteria. So that's a disaster show waiting to happen. But that's the mindset, that's our society. So they know that doesn't work, but that's what they've always done. And now they see the repeating cycle of their relationships that they just keep playing that out. So I go, okay, you meet somebody you like, how do you know whether you should let them become a closer friend? What's the criteria? What is good criteria? And that's boundaries. And so the boundaries, so just throw out kind of what you're hoping people will say. Okay, things in common. Oh, come on in.
Oh, wow. Oh, double wow.
So there is a fourth criteria that some mention, and I'll just throw it out. It's their personality. They're funny. That's the common one. So here's what I do. This is a little bunny trail for free. I ask clients, or I start by defining what is the difference between personality and character. Anybody? Personality?
Personality are things that somebody portrays, and character is the ones they believe.
Okay, very good. So personality is your basic, how you're wired. It doesn't change. So God made you an extrovert or an introvert. He made you very analytical, very artistic, very organized, very fly by the seat of your pants, spontaneous. All of those are your wiring, and that doesn't change, okay? Character, it can change. So it is controlled by your deepest morals and values. So everybody says, oh, I'm an honest person and all of that, and I go, good. But here's the true test of your character. If you could do whatever you wanted, and nobody would ever catch you or you'd never have a consequence, what would you do? That reveals your deepest belief system. And so they go, oh, I would be out doing all the stuff I have been doing, sexually, etc., and that hasn't satisfied. So what they have to begin to realize is that character is based on morals, number one. Then I make a decision, I choose to live by that moral. Then I repeat that decision until it becomes a habit. And then I keep doing the habit until it becomes who I am in my character. But if I make one or two bad decisions, I can undo all that work in no time flat. So character is the result of choices around my values. So I have to make sure I have the right value system. So what I tell people is this. The number one criteria for choosing whether a person you want a deeper friendship is spiritual intimacies. What's their spiritual? And I make very clear, I'm not talking about what religion are they. That has nothing to do with it. It's, I can only have somebody super close to me if we share the same heart, the same passion, the same values, if we're going in the same direction in our life. If they want to become a stripper and I want to become a missionary, doesn't matter what we have in common, we're not going to be good for each other or a good relationship. So the spiritual piece is the deepest core values the same, is what it boils down to. So then what I do with clients is this. We are attracted to people based on their looks and their personality. Do looks and personality guarantee a healthy, intimate relationship?
Oh, good heavens, no.
Okay, so what guarantees a good, healthy relationship? Both people have character. So this is the initial attraction, but if this doesn't become the source of beauty,
Both.
then you're going to have problems, right?
It's gotta be both.
Okay, so they quickly realize, because they've gone this road 1,000 times and knows it doesn't lead to a happy relationship, this is brand new territory. And so for them to realize, I have to change my focus in evaluating how I assess a person and begin to look at, so throughout character qualities. So honesty,
Integrity.
so integrity, what's all wrapped up in that? You do what you say you're going to do, you're not a hypocrite, you walk the talk, all of that.
Loyalty, dependability.
Dependability. Okay, very grateful, faithful, authentic, genuine, passion, compassion, empathy, forgiveness, all of those things. That's what makes healthy relationships. So I need to develop a new criteria that is based around boundaries of character.
What about like emotional, mental, physical health? I guess that would be like
That's all,
That
yeah.
would be like an umbrella.
Yeah, so you put all of that together and you end up physically, emotionally, and spiritually
Yeah.
healthy. So one of the things that we do with people with this is we flip it. And you're going to get a warning on this. So I ask clients, when you meet somebody and you really like them, how many of you have just got a gut feeling that something's off? a little red flag waving, going, whoa, danger, danger, danger. And so I go, okay, let's talk about what are those red flags. And so they go, somebody that's always can only talk about themselves. Every conversation that ends up back on themselves. Somebody that's controlling and jealous so much that they're checking your phone and your Facebook and all of that. I go, good, okay. So that's the opposite of character. So your red flags are your character opposites, your character flaws, your character defects. And so what they realize is they've had wonderful bodies and wonderful personalities, but nothing but character defects. And then that's the problem.
Shallow how?
Exactly.
Be fair weather friend.
Very hot and crazy. Basically all he talks is crazy.
Over here.
So a couple of directions we take that then is number one, part of boundaries is learning to listen to your red flags. Because your red flags become God's built-in sense of what is healthy. And so if you pay attention to your red flags, that's giving you insight into what a boundary should be about. So if somebody lies, I need a boundary around lying because I know that hurts and that destroys trust. All of those things. If somebody cheats on me, I need boundaries around that because that destroys trust and relationships, etc. If somebody starts to be a little disrespectful, taking little shots at me, pay attention, I need boundaries around respect because that destroys relationship. So that begins to give them a sense that there's already built into them a certain sense of healthy boundaries. So I go to the next thing, I go, how many of you have seen 10 red flags and ignored every one? And they all put their hands up. So I go, why did you ignore them? So tell me, why would you ignore red
Because I
flags?
wanted to get married.
I know.
Make me feel good.
Short-term pleasure, right? Or I'm so lonely, I'm afraid I'm gonna die alone, I gotta get somebody. Or if I've got lots of shame, so I use this illustration. If you look at a person with great character as a prime rib steak, okay? And then you see yourself as chopped liver. You're walking around saying, no prime rib's gonna want me. So the best I can do is get another chopped liver. So I'd rather settle for a few crumbs of love because I don't think I deserve the real thing. So that becomes their shame element. So you ignore red flags now because you don't think you deserve anything better than that. And you don't want to die alone. So those all become things. Some people ignore red flags because of financial. They're a single mom, can hardly pay the bills. Finally have somebody that's going to help them out a little bit, both with the kids and financially. They just can't resist the pull of that. So there's a bunch of different things, but it's really important for them to realize that they have a boundary system already there. They just ignored it. Now they need to begin to pay attention to that again. So they'll talk about their vibe that a person gives off, etc.
But in our society, so many times, do we really know what good character is?
Well, that's the problem. And that's why I say, when you look at the criteria that they use, I just scratch my head and go, what has our society become? Because everything in Hollywood just focuses on this. And so I think a big part, so another way to say what REACT is REACT isn't about people getting sober, it's about people getting healthy. And only healthy people stay sober. If they don't get healthy, they won't stay sober. And so this is the getting healthy. And so that's defining that. And that becomes your own internal boundaries. That becomes the boundaries that you expect in relationships before you allow a deeper relationship to happen. And that's all brand new territory for them. Just one second. So what will happen as we teach this is they'll think of all their exes with the red flags. But then most of them will go, that's me too. And they'll realize, I don't have character either, so I will never have a healthy relationship unless I start to change my red flags. I just see people in that workshop, almost like this huge reality descends on them, that boy, I got a lot of changing to do if I ever want a healthy relationship.
I think even healthy people are a bit blind when they're infatuated. But with this population, they've learned to self-deceive, so they can explain away any
Exactly.
and every red flag.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's, to me, one of the blessings of addiction, is a lot of them start getting honest. I'll tell you this, I ask clients this regularly: is there such a thing as no consequence sex? And a couple months ago, they go, yeah, you can have a one-night stand, no big deal, no strings attached, nothing. I don't have one, when they've been in recovery and hit a bottom, who said there's no consequences. And so for the first time, they get honest about that, and it took the pain of a bottom to get them there. But now once they get there, then I want to just keep them understanding and thinking what makes for healthy relationships. It's two healthy people. Any other questions on that? Okay. So you see how boundaries is all part of that, and you're just coming at it from different angles. So then what they are doing is they're thinking of their own life, they're thinking of their kids, their parenting, their relationships, and so it just starts going in all directions to every relationship. And so usually then the questions start coming. What about this? What about this? What about this? And that to me is exciting, because now I know they're internalizing it and trying to make it their own and very practical to where they're at. Okay, so I want to go on to internal boundaries for the rest of the night. So why don't we take a quick break, and we'll get into this rules for myself as we go get more food in our belly.
Yeah, there's soup and,
So just so you know, some of you have asked, so you can imagine that every topic we've covered in basically one night or 2 nights fills up a week. And so you can just imagine some of the questions and bunny trails that come along. So a while ago, Kim took all the phase 1 stuff and typed everything up for people to teach, and then it came to phase 2. How do you type up phase 2? Because it can go in 1,000 different directions. So what we've done is we've typed up most of it, and then other points that will probably get touched on at some point included. So once we're done, Kim will be giving all of you those notes, so just in case you're wondering. There's an element, if you ever do teach phase 2, that you're going to develop your own material, and you're going to piece that together as people ask questions and you listen and dialogue with people. You go, oh, that would fit good in that workshop. Oh, and you just gradually keep adding piece after piece until you get to a place where you kind of have a pretty good, can handle almost any question that comes along. But we'll try, we're going to give you kind of the basics that you can then build off of. Okay, so internal boundaries. Most people realize that their success in recovery ultimately depends on their internal boundaries. So they can desire to be sober all they want, but if they don't stick to a plan, they're not going to be sober. So it's interesting to me, what you get for a lot of people coming in recovery is the limbic brain response. I want this so bad. Or I hit a bottom and I made a decision I'm never going to use again. And I go, that'll keep you sober for a while, but not for long. And they get mad at that. So I say, okay, then what's your plan on days when you feel lazy? What's your plan? Well, I just made up. No, you got to have a plan. And so part of what many people in recovery have never done is think honestly and accurately through what does it take to stay clean and sober and to get healthy. So you can come at it from, they want to stay sober, that's number one, but secondly, they really want to get healthy relationships, especially with their kids. And then they just want to get healthier themselves and then their partner, etc. So I want them to see, okay, we're all clear on the goal. We all have the same goal. The problem is that a lot of people that say they have a goal never reach that goal. So internal boundaries is what does it take to reach that goal? And that requires carefully thinking through all the circumstances of your life, a plan for your life, all your weaknesses. So you got to factor in all of these different things to come up with a realistic plan. So it's not realistic to say I'm going to go to 3 meetings a day every day for the next 5 years, and then still hold down a job and still take care of my kids and all that. That is not realistic, so we're trying to help them think realistically. So here are the main things that I do with them. To reach these goals, you got to have priorities. So for example, if they're going to have healthy relationship with their children, they got to stay sober. But if they're going to stay sober, they got to keep spiritually fit. Because if they lose spiritual fitness, everything else falls away. So that's what I want them to realize, okay, God's got to be number one. And most will say that, even though they're not Christians, they'll have come to the point where they realize that spiritual piece has to be there. And then they'll say, I have to take care of myself physically, emotionally, spiritually. I got to be getting fit in all of those areas, because if any one of those starts to slide, it can mess me up. So, priorities is self-care, God's spiritual, and then beyond that, they get to what are their responsibilities. So their responsibilities are part of, I'll just add it as a, so one of the things that you can do with people is, well, let me just finish this. So then, in order to maintain these priorities and reach this goal, I now have to have a routine every day and a structure to my life. I can't just wake up and do what I feel like. And then I have to realize that some days I'm motivated, some days I'm not. So how do I maintain motivation? So it boils down to all of these are important. You got to have a plan, you got to have priorities, you got to have a goal, but you also got to keep motivated. And then I got lots of weaknesses. I get tempted, I get lonely, all of those things. So what am I going to build as safeguards, okay? So here's sometimes what we do with them is to take a page or a week out of a day timer. And so I'll have all the hours of the day laid out. And this is important because a lot of people think they can do all of this responsibilities and priorities easily without realizing how much time certain responsibilities take. So we give them a day timer and we go, okay, you're going back to work, pen in the amount of hours every day you're going to be at work. Well, that's 10 hours. Okay, you got a relationship, you got kids in sports, how much time is that going to take every evening and every morning? They pen that in, okay? You want a relationship with God, where are you going to fit that in? You got to stay on track in recovery, you want to go to meetings and support groups, fit that in, all of a sudden they go, ah, like that. So one couple ways that I illustrate it to them is this. I just use the picture of somebody juggling, and I say in recovery you got 1 or 2 balls that you're juggling. Pretty simple. You go to a program, you eat, sleep, and go to a meeting. That's pretty simple. And you visit your kids on the weekend, you talk to your spouse or text to them, but it's a very simple life. You get out of the program, now all of a sudden you got 10 balls you're trying to juggle, and something's going to crash. And so you got to be realistic about the number of balls you have to juggle and the amount of time and energy you have to do that. Another illustration that's sometimes helpful, I don't know if you've seen the golf balls, gravel, and sand illustration. Okay, so you put golf balls, gravel, sand. And then you fill up the sand first, then the gravel and the golf balls, and they won't fit. So you do it the other way around. The golf balls are the biggest, you put them in first, then the gravel, and then the sand blends in all around it. So what you want them to see from that is that you gotta get the main pieces there right. And once you got the main pieces right, the rest will fall into place, but you can never sacrifice the main golf balls. So this is another way of putting it in a picture for them, so that they begin to realize all of this. So working with a day timer is really important, because what I want them to do is say, what time are you going to wake up in the morning? What time are you going to go to bed? How much sleep do you need? And I want them to realize that much of recovery hangs on, are you rested or not? Because if you're tired, you're going to lose motivation. And so sleep becomes very important. Then I go, if you're eating junk food all day, how does that affect you? So they're going to realize, now this covers my eating habits. And if you just sit on the couch playing video games all day, how does that affect you? So they need to think through, what does it mean to be healthy physically, emotionally, and spiritually? What does that look like? And then how are you going to schedule that? Now here's one of the dangers you're going to get. Many are perfectionists. So they think, to do it well, I got to do it perfectly. And I want them to understand there's a difference between doing your best than doing it perfectly. And for some, that's a hard thing to accept. I got this much time, I'm going to do my best in the time that I have. It might not be perfect, but it's the best I can do. And that's a new way of thinking for many people, because what they begin to think, if they stick to perfectionism, if I can't do it perfectly, why bother trying? I'm going to fail. And so everything gets dumped because they can't do it perfectly. So you have to address that perfectionist piece when it comes to this. The other challenge is, this is new. This is working out of your cortex, not doing what you feel like. And that becomes important. But then the next thing is, if you grew up in chaos, what does this feel like? Boring. And what gets triggered by boredom? Create chaos. And so a lot of people need to realize that getting healthy will have times that feel very boring. You're doing the same thing every day, and you're not necessarily seeing instant results. So I like to use different illustrations with clients. The farmer that plants a seed, an addict farmer would be out the next day mad that it hadn't been ready for harvest yet. But a farmer waters it, weeds it, waits, nurtures it. No results, no results, no results, finally results. And so it's realized that the best things often come through long path of nurture with no results until finally a result. And so you have to wait for some of the greatest things. And another example of that is a woman being pregnant. You got to endure the discomfort and the frustration and pain, but it becomes worth it in the end. So that waiting principle around structure where they're not seeing instant results, which they want to see, and therefore it feels boring. A big thing that's important to do is, what are demotivators and what are motivators? So, pick your brains. Demotivators.
Huge tasks, huge job.
Yes. So what happens for a lot of clients is, let me give you an example. They got to find an apartment, okay? All they see is apartment. They don't have the tools to break that down into doable steps. They don't have the tools that look in the paper, look in the rent guide, phone. They just go, I got to find an apartment by this date. That's too big, and they freak right out. It's too overwhelming. So part of what you do is break it down into steps for them, and then all of a sudden it's doable, and the anxiety goes down because now they can see it as possible. Another big one is getting a job. That just freaks them out, and then you say, okay, let's work on your resume today, and then tomorrow we'll look at the job ads, then tomorrow you're gonna phone 1 or 2 places or drop your resume off, but you break it into small steps, and then all of a sudden, it's doable. And so that becomes very important. So, demotivators, it's too big, give up. It's overwhelming. Okay, other demotivators.
Like, receive criticism?
Criticism, exactly. Yeah. So if you're going along and getting lots of encouragement, and then somebody points out something that you're doing that isn't healthy, you're just deflated. You go, quit, hopeless, failed, why bother? Okay? Why, what else?
Just simple fatigue.
Yeah, tired. Yeah. And some of that is stress tired, some of that is not sleeping well tired, some of that is stuffing emotions tired, some of that is depression tired. So there's all kinds of different tireds, but they're all demotivators. Okay? Other demotivators.
Depression.
Depression, yeah. And anxiety. So a lot of people with anxiety freeze. They just can't move. Their feet are in cement. So again, what I do with those kind of things is I don't want them just to see the demotivators. I want them to have some tools. Okay, what do I do if I'm feeling anxiety? What do I do if I'm feeling depressed? What will help me get past that and get motivated again? And so sometimes it's just talking to somebody about it, making a to-do list, and kind of planning a realistic day where you don't demand that you do 50 things, but just 5 things today. So you have a little success, all of that kind of things are very important. Okay? Other demotivators.
How you see yourself?
Yes, shame. Yeah,
Also getting stuck.
exactly. You get in that, you hit a wall somewhere and you're not sure what to do next. Is that what you're referring to? Yeah.
Unexpected things, setbacks.
Exactly. So being blindsided by something that you weren't expecting, that just sends you for a loop. Yeah. So usually you can pretty much fill up a board with demotivating things. And a lot of people are quite shocked when they realize everything you write on the board applies to them. They've been demotivated by it. So I then want to go to, okay, what are naturally healthy, motivating things? So one of the illustrations I use is that a lot of people coming into recovery have this huge fire inside and like a bonfire. And the reality is if you don't keep putting wood in the fire begins to go out. So what do you need to do to keep the fire with wood in it? How do you feed that fire? Now, it's not always going to be blazing hot, it's going to fluctuate, but you have to do things to help with the motivation. So any ideas on that one? Okay.
Routine?
Routine is great.
Proper diet.
Proper diet, so that taking care of yourself physically again keeps you motivated.
One day at a time.
Yes, very important.
I keep thinking of 1 year, 2 year, 5 year cakes.
Okay, so let me touch on both. If you look at complex trauma, what you do is you never live in the present, you live in the past or the future. You see that? So you're worried about the future, and you're regurgitating the past or trying to shove it down. You don't do very well at being present. And so part of what is important is for people to be present in today and learn how to live in today. And that becomes huge in parenting. Most people who are addicts were hurt by a parent who wasn't present. And they just knew the parent wasn't present even though they were in the room. And so they realize they're probably doing the same thing. So their kids are wanting their attention and they're on Facebook or on their phone and they're kind of half listening and all of that, and it's hurting their kids. So they have to begin to develop the tools to be present for themselves and for those around them. And that becomes a big part of motivation, is being present. What did you say again, Donna? Because I was gonna.
I'm Kathy.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Donna's here.
I said, 1 year, 2 year, 5 year
Yes.
takes.
So when you think of motivators, think of what things that motivate children.
Reward.
Gold stars, reward, all of those things. So
1 year, 5 year, 3 year, they'll be very overwhelming for a lot of people just
Exactly.
coming in, so it's like 30 days is huge.
exactly. So validation, recognition, appreciation, encouragement, pats on the back, all of those are motivators. A lot of us struggle with that because it makes us uncomfortable. And we don't like people making a fuss over us, or we're afraid we're gonna get proud or something, and all that comes into play. But we are built to need validation. And so work with that. And so we don't want motivation to just be fear-based, negative emotion. That's what you grow up with. You want motivation to be positive as well. And that's people who encourage you and nurture you and validate you. And you learn to validate yourself as well. Okay? Other motivators.
Accounts,
Children,
looking after and measuring your progress.
Yes. So what you're gonna find with people in recovery is you're gonna notice their growth before they do. So they don't think they're changing or growing, but you see it. They just can't see it in themselves yet. So they need us to be able to say, I see growth in you, I see stuff happening in you. And that just means so much to them. It's very important for them. Ron, what did you?
like you said, kids.
Kids, yeah. So when they start to get good consequences happening from the hard work, so they get a job, they get their money back, their house back, their kids back, country song backwards, whatever, all of that. Then they go, big picture, I can play the tape to the end now, it's worth it. And in the beginning, they can't play that tape yet to the end. So what I say to a lot of clients is this. Most that come into recovery have zero or little hope that they're gonna make it, because their hope they failed so many times. And so what I say is piggyback off my hope until you get your own hope. I have hope for you. If you do this stuff, I know it will work. So piggyback on my hope for a while until you see enough success that you gain your own hope. And that's really part of our role as well. Okay, any other motivators? So I'm kind of working this demotivator-motivator with you is this. Clients love getting concepts and light bulbs go off when they get a new concept. And they need that, but they need point by point, small step stuff as well. And they don't think very well because nobody's ever modeled it or taught them all of the little things that make for a healthy life. So part of what you're trying to do is break down what does a person need to be healthy? Well, they need love, nurture, validation, reward. They need to be able to talk to somebody. They need to be able to have competition even. So you talk to people that go on diets, they fail repeatedly on their own. And so they get with a group that's on a diet and they're accountable to each other. They compete with each other. You see people that try to exercise programs on their own and they peter out. But if they do it with somebody, they stick at it. And so we need companionship. We need somebody on the journey with us. Even competition. All of those things God built into us, and it's fine to be able to use those things. And they all can become motivators.
I think it's good to do it for yourself, not to get your children back.
Right.
And to have a higher life purpose.
Yes.
To define your destiny.
Yes.
And then recovery is just a step towards that.
Yes. Very good. So let me just expand on that a little bit. I think a high percentage of women and that come into recovery, their higher power is their children. That's their motivator. And what I've learned is this. That's okay for now. but it won't keep you clean for the rest of your life. So if you don't get a higher power than just your kids, eventually your kids won't be enough. If I was to say right at the very beginning, it's not good enough to have your kids, they would understand that, they wouldn't be able to get their head around it. So I don't try to argue with them, your kids are your high power, I get it. Because you desperately want to get them back and you love them. But I know internally, unless they get a greater, higher power, their kids won't be enough. So I think it's realizing that this is great as a big picture, but we all get there in very kind of different ways, some faster, some slower. We have growth spurts and we level off for a while and hit a bit of a rut. And so it's really important, I think, in boundaries to realize, again, don't be too hard on yourself. Set goals, work at them, encourage yourself, but failure will be part of it, struggles will be part of it, and don't let that defeat you, and just that reality that is there. Okay, then the next piece that I want to emphasize is what are your particular areas of weakness. So Hebrews 12 says, we are surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses. Let us lay aside every weight and the sins that so easily beset us. And what he's saying there is every person has their own unique set of things that trip them up. And so we need to live our life in light of our weaknesses. And so for a lot of people, well, you can imagine their weaknesses. There's a sexual piece that's a weakness for most people. There's a relationship, wanting to be in a relationship piece, and not wanting loneliness. That's a real weakness. You're going to get people with around the use of money, having money, not having money. Having money is a trigger, not having money is a trigger because you look for a quick dollar. First paychecks are huge for people in recovery because it's a huge trigger. GST check day, family allowance check day, all of those are triggers. So it's realizing, I don't care where you're going to be in 20 years. I hope you're strong enough that you can get a paycheck that doesn't even bother you. But you're not there right now. You're really, really vulnerable and fragile right now. So we got to plan realistically around that. And so I can say, don't spend your paycheck, but you don't have the strength to resist the temptation once you get that paycheck. So we got to be realistic. So what do you need to do when you get that paycheck? Or if you're not able to handle credit cards, what do you then need to do around a bank card, etc.? But the things that most easily trip them up is what you're trying to be aware of. So just throw out any that you've encountered that are very big trip-ups. Fridays, huge. For guys and girls in Winnipeg, spring, summer. Good weather's here, it's party time, and it's hardly any clothes time, and it's a huge trigger for partying and sexual stuff. Main holidays are huge triggers. And what is important to understand is in churches we have Mother's Day and we laud mothers and we talk about how great mothers are. Do you realize that 99% of addicts hate Mother's Day? It's the worst day of the year for them because they had a terrible mother and it brings all their own guilt about how they've been as a mother, or they've lost a mother. They hate Christmas, they hate Easter, because that's family events and there are always fights and drunkenness and chaos. So the things that for us are great holidays, for them are the worst times of the year.
And the churches close those
Exactly.
evenings because they say it's family time. But what about people who don't have a family?
Exactly.
Nobody caters to them.
Exactly.
I think another trigger probably like anniversary of the death of a family
Yes.
member.
Exactly. So we're going to do grieving when I come back in a couple weeks. But we're going to talk about that. So part of anticipating major anniversaries can be very, very difficult. What you'll find with clients is a couple other things. So with the anniversary of death, a lot of people relapse as that date approaches because it just gets so much happening inside of them. But some, when they're starting to get to the end or close to graduation, they sabotage their recovery because they think everybody's going to abandon me. You're not abandoning them, but that's what they feel. And so they go into that. That's a huge trigger. And then another one is success. For many people, they've learned how to handle tough times. They just don't know how to handle success. And success really plays with their head and messes them up. And so there's a lot of things that you work with them in a realistic recovery plan about where they're weak, their triggers, all of that stuff. So what you can see, if you were to just spend a morning on this, the hope would be by the end of the morning, people are going to have a fairly custom-made plan for themselves that's going to cover just about every part of their life. What I tell clients is this: we're going to be able to kind of lay out 80% of what that plan should be, but you're going to be learning as you go, and you're going to keep adding pieces as you begin to learn more about yourself, what demotivates you, where you're weakest, when you're weakest. And so your plan is going to continue to develop and get filled in even more. So this isn't by no way a finished product, is what I want them to understand. Any questions on that? Okay, so let me, go ahead.
So you would count out some a little day timer?
Or photocopy a sheet from it,
And then how much time would you spend on that with them?
half an hour. Because what I want them to realize is, okay, you need to get up a certain time. You need to, if you're going to be spiritually fit, you got to have some quiet time every day. So it could be morning, night, whatever. But then how are you going to fit everything in? And usually by the end of it, they begin to get a realistic looking week that's doable. They usually start out with very unrealistic schedules, but they start to help them
So
think it
then,
through.
so would you then very next day that you would see them again, and, or a week later?
Yeah,
or
what we
later?
do-
How it's going?
What the way React is planned is Fridays is all about this stuff every Friday. And it's about relapse-related things. So warning signs, things that are triggering you, safety plans, all of that kind of stuff. And usually you'll find most weeks they look forward to Friday because they've had a super stressful week and they're just so triggered. And the weekend coming is not good news because they just want to go and go crazy. And so they need to be able to process all of that before they head into the weekend. And so you'll get a lot of people on a Friday that just say, I'm not in a good place. And I'm kind of afraid to go into this weekend. So you start to say, okay, what do you need to do this weekend to get you through? So do you need to phone another client or text throughout the day, get to a meeting, have somebody go with you to a meeting, get to church, but really lay it out. And what I want people to realize is this. So most clients, they don't make decisions by planning ahead. They make decisions by reacting to how they're feeling in the moment. And so what I want them to realize, okay, you just recognize the feeling, so now let's plan ahead. Let's make sure we've got a safety net in place to get you through this weekend. That's reasonable. And that can turn into a wonderful growth thing for them because they begin to realize the value. Now the problem that most have is that characteristic of complex trauma. I don't want to be a burden to anybody else. So if I'm struggling, I don't want to share it and ask for help because I might be a burden. And so you want them to realize they can do that, and this is a safe place.
Do you use other modalities like music therapy?
Yes, art therapy.
Massage, tapping?
Exactly, yeah.
Do you teach them?
Yeah, that's all in the grounding stuff that we do, the DBT stuff. So mindfulness, grounding, dialectical behavior therapy. Yeah. So a lot will have music, nature, recreation as a very therapeutic calming thing. Yeah.
It's
Okay.
useful at some, especially if people seem really restless when they come in. We'll put something on the TV like BBC, nature stuff, and it really does kind of calm everybody down.
Yeah.
You know, even if they're not paying attention, there's just these soothing nature sounds going on in the background while they're getting settled, and it really makes a difference.
Yes. One of the things that it's important to be available for but sensitive to as well. So when I come in and the clients come in the morning, I just kind of my spidey senses checking everybody's eyes and body language and all of that. And if I sense somebody struggling, I'll go and talk to them. Some just automatically go like to Britt's office and say, oh, I'm going crazy, can I talk to you? And you just have to be available and just calm them down for a little bit. So that's where you can do some grounding stuff just to help them regulate their emotions. But that's early morning, being alert to where everybody's at and just kind of what they need to get into a safe place again. Yeah. So potentially embarrassing question. How many of you do all this in your personal life? Ron does.
I have to.
Some of you won't do it in a formal way, you just do it by habit now, subconsciously in your head. But clients will sense just kind of if you've got some of this stuff in a good place or not so good place. So. Okay, I wanted to end with something. I gave you the James chapter 5. Yes.
Yeah, then there's
Yeah.
any more copies of the copy.
So this came, it's kind of interesting, this Sunday we were at the house church, Mike's house, and they were doing this passage, and finding freedom and react were really built off of this passage. So I just shared about what I had studied and learned over the years about this, so Mike suggested that I talk about it here so you could get a bigger kind of theological framework to finding freedom, react, and what we're all about. So it says, if any of you suffering hardship, you should pray. If you're happy, sing praises. If you're sick, call for the elders of the church to come and pray for you, anointing you with oil in the name of the Lord. Such prayer offered in faith will heal the sick, and the Lord will make you well. And if you've committed any sin, you'll be forgiven. Confess your sins to each other, pray for each other so that you may be healed. And then it uses this example. The earnest prayer of a righteous man has great power and produces wonderful results. And Elijah was as human as we are, and yet he prayed earnestly that no rain would fall, and none fell for 3.5 years. Then when he prayed again, the sky sent down rain, and the earth began to yield its crops. Many churches use this as far as anointing people literally with oil and praying for their physical healing. And I think it's included in that. But as I studied it, what it jumped out at me is that the word for suffering hardship meant to emotional, spiritual, weariness, sickness. So it's not just physical sickness, it's emotional, spiritual sickness. And then I asked myself, why does it tell us the story of Elijah? So everybody knows the story of Elijah. He goes to King Ahab and says it's not going to rain again. And you go, wow, that was amazing faith. But it was based on Deuteronomy 28. So Deuteronomy 28 is the marriage covenant God made with Israel. And he says, if you obey me, then all these good things are going to happen. But if you start doing what is unhealthy, then you're going to get negative consequences. So consequence 1 is going to stop raining. Consequence 2, there'll be a drought and famine. Consequence 3. And so it's the longer you stay sick, the worse things are going to get. The longer you disobey, the more sick you become. And then the final consequence is that a nation will come in and take you captive and take you into captivity. And so if you look through the history of Israel, you watch that being carried out over and over again. So Elijah didn't just wake up one morning and say, oh, I think it's a good idea to stop raining. He was studying Deuteronomy 28 and he says, Israel's not following God, and God says it's not going to rain, so I'm going to go and I'm going to announce that. And so what he was recognizing is that what happened on the land was a metaphor for what was happening in the people's souls. So the more they stayed in disobedience, drought came, they became spiritually thirsty, famine came, they got sicker and sicker until they lost it all. And that's a perfect illustration of what happens in addiction, the longer the person stays into it. So then, that's the whole context for spiritual or emotional sickness that he's talking about. So it's not just physical sickness, it's people who live outside of God's design. So that's what Finding Freedom and React are all about. So then the next thing that stood out to me was that anoint with oil. Go to the elders and anoint with oil. So there are 2 words in the Greek language for anoint. There's the one that was used when they made a king and they poured oil on his head. That's not the word used here. The word used here was putting oil on a person to massage them. Isn't that interesting? But that became an idiom in the culture, so it wasn't just a physical massage. What it meant was you find out where a person's hurting and massage them there. And that could be their soul. So what it says, if a person's run down and defeated and spiritually and emotionally sick, go to elders or wise, mature people, and they will work with you and find out where the sickness is, and they'll start to massage that. And that's what we do. And then what does he say? Then healing will begin to happen. And then he goes further and he says, confess your sin to each other. So how do you continue to stay healthy? You start an ongoing process or routine in your life of being open and honest and sharing where you're at, your struggles, your failures, and you get a people around you who pray with you and help you stay healthy. So he gives us beautiful layout of how do you help a sick soul, not just a sick body. And so when I first understood that, then I said, that's what really I think the church is about. It's not just about helping people who are sick spiritually or sick physically. We've really missed it on helping people who are sick emotionally. And so that's where the healing is to come, and that's what God has kind of called me to, as far as finding out where that soreness is and that sickness is, pouring oil there, and massaging that until there's health that's restored. So there you go. Any comments or questions? See, that didn't take as long as I thought it would. Now I got to share something else. I'll share.
Being so good and quiet.
I know.
You get more and more stories.
No, it makes so much sense, like working one-on-one with somebody and working on the same issue, or not even the same issue, but coming over different areas of my life, and paying close attention to them and working them through.
Exactly.
Bang on.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good.
Well, I think one of the other, and you touched on it for sure, is that the fact that Elijah, as it says, was just like anybody else,
Exactly.
right? Like,
Yeah.
you know,
As normal as us.
it's just right, and that's another key factor here, that can be anyone who can be called, that God is actually calling, has prepared to be a part of what he's, and it doesn't, he's not just calling the special people.
Superstars, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and I think what we've seen over and over is that as you look at the healers of the Bible, they were wounded healers. And that's who God uses the most, are the wounded people who found healing themselves, and now they're a wounded healer. I used Isaiah, do you remember the promise about Messiah, that he's come to set the captives free and proclaim liberation and all of that? And then he talks about he gives beauty for ashes. And so the metaphor, and it's when I first taught Finding Freedom for the first time, this was the base verse that was part of what we taught. Because the picture of ashes is somebody within the culture who's just lost somebody very close to them who's died. And so the practice was to throw ashes all over yourself. And so what he's talking about is somebody basically sitting on this ash heap who's lost everything, and they're just so distraught and overwhelmed by the pain of that, they're just ashes, ashes. And so what God is saying is, I want to bring beauty from the ashes. And that's again what we do. We take people sitting on ash heaps, let God work on them, rub the oil in, and pretty soon you got the beauty that follows. So there's no other job I would rather do than massage wounded souls. It is one of the most rewarding jobs in the world. I tell pastors all the time that I probably see in 1 week God work in greater ways than most of them would see in a year. Because when you get to the doing the soul stuff, it's amazing the healing that starts to happen that most churches know nothing about. Good. Well, thank you.
Thank you. We don't want to leave yet.
Just trying to quickly think of an story.
Well, I didn't bring my list of other stories to tell. Yes.
Does anyone know a good church around Joyce